Some of the habits that are keeping you stuck today may be the very habits that spent years helping you fit in, avoid disappointing people, keep the peace, and be seen as the good girl. We've lived with them for so long, they no longer feel like habits. They feel like part of who we are. But maybe that's not the whole story. Maybe they're simply old ways of responding that made perfect sense at one time in your life, but no longer fit the woman you are today. And that's what I want to explore with you. If we haven't met, I'm Dee Dee Sung, and this is Follow Your Lighthouse. Here we talk about the emotional transitions women experience in the second half of life. The truth is, most of us don't wake up one morning and decide we're going to spend our lives putting other people first. We don't decide to become people pleasers, to keep the peace at all costs, or to feel like we constantly have to prove ourselves. Those ways of responding develop over time, often so gradually that we don't even realize it's happening, until one day we find ourselves wondering, why do I keep doing this? It's difficult to question a way of living when it's the only way you've ever known. The more often we respond in the same way, the more natural that response feels. Eventually, we stop paying attention to it. It becomes our normal. And that's why these habits can stay with us for decades without us ever realizing they're habits at all. As you're listening, you may start recognizing yourself in some of what I'm describing. That's exactly why I created the 72-hour Compass Reset, and I'll share a little more about it before we finish. From a very young age, many of us learned there were certain ways of behaving that were expected of us. Maybe you heard, be a good girl, or be nice, don't make waves, don't say too much, be polite. Those were some of the messages I grew up with. I don't remember anyone explaining what it meant to be a good girl. I figured it out by watching what happened around me. I noticed how people reacted when I did what was expected of me and when I didn't. And from those moments, I began defining what it meant to be a good girl. Over time, I learned that life felt easier when I didn't make things difficult for other people, when I put other people's needs ahead of my own. And before long, those ways of responding just became part of me. They became the standard I measured myself against. I wanted to be the good girl. It kept me safe. As children, we're constantly paying attention to what's happening around us. We notice what keeps the peace and what seems to upset the people around us. Those experiences shape the way we see ourselves, and over time, they become habits. And habits that have been with us for years can begin to feel like part of who we are. No wonder they're difficult to let go of, because what's familiar often feels safer than the unknown. When you understand how these habits developed, it's easier to see why we've spent years judging ourselves for something we learned long before we were old enough to question it. And here's what I've come to understand. These habits aren't the problem. They've been doing exactly what they needed to do. They helped you avoid conflict. They helped you fit in. They helped you feel safer. The challenge is that we can keep relying on those same habits long after they've stopped serving us. As we move through life, something begins to shift. We gain life experience. We develop greater self-awareness. We begin seeing our lives differently. Questions start to surface that we may never have asked before. Is this still working for me? Is this how I want to keep living? Those are important questions because once we begin asking them, we realize something. Just because a habit has become deeply ingrained doesn't mean it still belongs in our lives today. Letting go isn't easy. We're saying goodbye to ways of responding we've relied on for a very long time. That's why these habits can be so difficult to let go of. They've become familiar. They've become automatic. And when something becomes automatic, we rarely stop to question it. They helped us once. They don't have to define us forever. So what do these habits actually look like? They're often hidden in the everyday moments we hardly notice. saying yes when you really wanted to say no, keeping your opinion to yourself because it feels easier than speaking up, apologizing when there was nothing to apologize for. That's what makes these habits so easy to miss. They've become part of our everyday way of being. As I've reflected on my own life and through conversations with many women, I've noticed these good girl habits often fall into three familiar patterns. I call them the 3 Ps. The first is people pleasing. It's about putting someone else's needs ahead of your own. We agree when we really don't want to. We overextend ourselves. We say yes even when we know we don't have the time, energy, or desire. We'd rather disappoint ourselves than risk disappointing someone else. Then there's peacekeeping. It's about avoiding conflict at almost any cost. We hold back what we really think. We tell ourselves it's not worth bringing up. We avoid difficult conversations. We convince ourselves it's easier to stay quiet until one day we realize we've become so good at keeping the peace that we've stopped speaking up for ourselves. But keeping the peace with everyone else can come at the expense of our own peace. The third P is proving. It's the feeling that who we are is never quite enough. So we keep trying to prove ourselves by saying yes one more time, by taking on one more responsibility, by believing that if we just do a little more, we'll finally feel like we're enough. Only somehow we never quite get there. It's as though the finish line keeps moving. When you step back and look at these 3 patterns together, people-pleasing, peacekeeping, proving, they all have something in common. At one time, they served a purpose. They helped us navigate the people and expectations around us. As our self-awareness grows, we begin noticing when these habits are showing up. We recognize them more quickly, and we realize they no longer fit our lives today. That's where the tension begins. Part of us is ready to let them go, while another part still slips back into old habits. Once we recognize these habits, it's natural to think, now that I can see it, I'll stop doing it. But recognizing a habit and changing a habit aren't the same thing. These habits have been with us for years. They've become familiar. They've become automatic. And that's why we can still find ourselves repeating them, even when we genuinely want to respond differently. That's frustrating. You think, I knew what I wanted to say, so why did I say the opposite? Or, why did I stay quiet again? That's often when we become our own harshest critic. We turn our frustration inward. We start asking ourselves, what's wrong with me? But what if that's the wrong question? What if there isn't anything to fix? What if you've been judging yourself for habits that developed long before you were old enough to question them? That's a very different way of looking at ourselves. Self-judgment keeps our attention on what's wrong with us, while curiosity asks, I wonder why this still feels so familiar. What have you been judging yourself for habits that developed long before you were old enough to question them? That's a very different way of looking at ourselves. Self-judgment keeps our attention on what's wrong with us, while curiosity asks, I wonder why this still feels so familiar. I wonder what this habit has been trying to protect me from. I wonder what I needed when I first learned to respond this way. Do you notice the difference? One question leads to criticism, the other leads to understanding, and understanding changes how we see ourselves. Instead of seeing ourselves as the problem, we begin seeing the patterns that have shaped us. And maybe that's the real invitation. Not to stop being the good girl, but to stop believing that's the only way we can feel like we're enough. That doesn't mean those patterns have to shape the rest of our lives. It means we can meet ourselves with curiosity and self-compassion instead of self-judgment. because it's very difficult to change a habit when we're busy criticizing ourselves for having it. If you've recognized yourself in today's conversations, I hope you'll leave with this thought. You don't have to keep judging yourself for the habits you've developed. They were ways of responding that made sense at one time in your life. The past helps us understand ourselves. It doesn't have to define what comes next. We begin by meeting ourselves with curiosity and self-compassion. It creates space between the habit and how we choose to respond. If you'd like to explore this a little further, I've created the 72-hour Compass Reset. It's free, it takes just 10 minutes a day for 3 days, and is designed to help you begin noticing these habits in your own life. You'll gain clarity on what matters most to you right now and identify your next right step. I'd love to have you join me, and you'll find the link in the description below. Now, before you go, which of the 3 P's did you recognize most in yourself? People-pleasing, peacekeeping, or proving? Or maybe today's conversation helped you see yourself a little differently. Share your reflection in the comments. Thanks for joining me, and until next time, keep turning towards your own light. Take good care, and I will see you soon.